You finished your workout and you felt fine. Maybe a little tired, maybe a little warm, but fine. You went home, had dinner, went to sleep, and then you woke up the next morning and could barely get out of bed. Your legs burned going down the stairs. Sitting down felt like a controlled fall. And by the second day, it was even worse. The workout was yesterday. The pain arrived today, and it will peak tomorrow. If you have ever exercised with any seriousness, you know exactly what this feels like. That specific, deep, almost satisfying ache in the muscles you targeted. That stiffness when you try to straighten your arm after heavy curls, or stand up after squats, or reach for something after your first serious rowing session. It has a name: DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. And almost everything most people believe about why it happens is wrong. Here is the question that should have always bothered you. If the damage happened during the workout, why does the pain not arrive until 24 to 48 hours later? Why does the body wait 2 days to tell you something happened? That delay is not a glitch. It is not your nervous system being slow. It is a precisely orchestrated biological sequence involving your immune system, your connective tissue, your pain receptors, and a cascade of molecular signals that unfolds on a very specific timeline. And once you understand that sequence, you will never think about soreness, recovery, or muscle adaptation the same way again. But before we get to what actually causes DOMS, we need to get rid of the explanation you have probably heard 100 times, the one that is almost certainly wrong. Lactic acid. If you have ever been told that the soreness you feel the day after training is caused by lactic acid buildup in your muscles, you were told something that has been scientifically obsolete for decades. Here is the problem with that explanation. Lactate, which is what people are actually referring to when they say lactic acid, clears from your muscles within 1 to 2 hours after exercise ends. By the time you finish your post-workout meal, the lactate is gone. By the time you go to sleep, there is no meaningful lactate left in the tissue. But the soreness does not even begin for another 12 to 24 hours, and it does not peak until 48 hours after that. The timelines do not match. They cannot match. Lactate is long gone by the time the pain starts, so lactate cannot be causing DOMS. And yet this myth persists, repeated by coaches and trainers and fitness influencers who have simply never looked at the underlying research. The real mechanism is far more interesting, and it starts not with chemistry, but with physics, with physical damage to the structure of the muscle itself. When you perform exercise, especially exercise that involves eccentric contractions, which are contractions where the muscle is lengthening while it is under tension, like lowering a weight, running downhill, or the lowering phase of a push-up, you place enormous mechanical stress on the individual muscle fibers. At the microscopic level, inside each muscle fiber, the basic contractile unit is called a sarcomere. Sarcomeres are lined up end to end along structures called myofibrils. And at the boundaries between sarcomeres, there is a structural anchor called the Z-line, or Z-disc, which holds the contractile proteins in alignment. Under extreme eccentric loading, these Z-lines can be disrupted. The regular pattern of the sarcomeres becomes irregular. The myofibrils fray. Under electron microscopy, you can actually see this structural disorganization in muscle tissue taken from people in the hours after intense eccentric exercise. This is what people mean when they talk about micro-tears in the muscle. It is real, and it is structural, and it happens during the workout itself. But here is the key. This structural damage does not hurt. Not yet. The pain receptors in your muscle tissue, the nociceptors, are not directly activated by the mechanical disruption of the sarcomeres. Something else has to happen first. And that something else is what takes 48 hours. When the Z lines are disrupted and the muscle fiber membranes are stressed, proteins and enzymes that normally live inside the muscle cell begin to leak out into the surrounding tissue. Creatine kinase is one of them. Myoglobin is another. These are molecules that belong inside the cell, and their presence outside the cell is a molecular distress signal. The body interprets their presence in the extracellular space as evidence that something has gone wrong, that tissue is damaged, that a repair response is needed, and the system that responds to that signal is your immune system. Within the first few hours after exercise-induced muscle damage, the first wave of immune cells arrives. These are neutrophils, the first responders of the immune system, the cells that rush to any site of tissue damage in the body. Neutrophils begin infiltrating the damaged muscle tissue within hours of exercise. They release enzymes and reactive oxygen species that help clear cellular debris. They also release chemical signals, called cytokines and prostaglandins, that recruit the next wave of immune cells and begin amplifying the inflammatory response. By around 24 hours post-exercise, a second wave of immune cells arrives. These are macrophages, which are larger and more powerful than neutrophils. Macrophages come in two distinct phases. The first phase, called M1 macrophages, are inflammatory. They continue clearing debris, phagocytosing damaged cellular material, and releasing pro-inflammatory cytokines including interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor, and interleukin-1 beta. The second phase, M2 macrophages, are anti-inflammatory and repair-oriented. They release growth factors, including insulin-like growth factor 1 and transforming growth factor beta, that activate the satellite cells responsible for repairing and rebuilding the muscle tissue. This is the cascade: structural damage, protein leakage, neutrophil infiltration, cytokine release, macrophage invasion, peak inflammation, pain, repair. And the reason it peaks at 48 hours is simply that this is how long it takes for the full inflammatory response to build. The first responders arrive early. The main immune response peaks in the 24 to 72 hour window. And it is specifically the prostaglandins and bradykinin released by the immune cells that sensitize your nociceptors, your pain receptors, making them more responsive to stimuli they would normally ignore. This is why not just direct pressure on the muscle causes pain during DOMS, but also stretching it, or even just moving it through its range of motion. The nociceptors have been chemically sensitized. They are firing at lower thresholds than normal. The pain is not coming from the damage itself. The pain is coming from a deliberate inflammatory sensitization of your pain receptors, triggered by your own immune system as part of a tissue repair and quality control process. Now step back and think about what this actually means. Your body does not send pain signals because it is broken. It sends pain signals because it is working. The soreness of DOMS is your immune system broadcasting a message to the rest of your body. This tissue is under repair. Protect it, load it carefully, give it time. The discomfort is not a malfunction. It is a managed biological response, precisely calibrated to the degree of tissue damage that occurred, unfolding on a predictable timeline because the sequence of immune cell recruitment and cytokine release follows a predictable schedule. This understanding changes the way you should interpret soreness. One of the most persistent myths in fitness is that soreness equals growth, that if you are not sore after a workout, you did not do enough. That soreness is the signal that the muscle was adequately stimulated. This is not supported by the evidence. DOMS is a marker of unaccustomed mechanical stress. It appears most intensely when you do something your muscle tissue is not used to, whether that is a new exercise, a longer range of motion, a heavier load, or simply returning to training after a break. As your body adapts to a specific training stimulus, DOMS from that same stimulus decreases and eventually disappears. Not because the muscle is no longer growing, but because the tissue has become more resistant to the structural disruption that triggers the inflammatory cascade in the first place. The muscle fibers become structurally more resilient. The Z lines become more stable. Less damage occurs from the same workload, and so less inflammation is triggered and less soreness results. This is the repeated bout effect, one of the most reliable phenomena in exercise science. After a single bout of eccentric exercise that causes significant DOMS, a second identical bout performed days or weeks later produces dramatically less soreness, less muscle damage markers in the blood, less strength loss, and faster recovery. The protection is specific to the movement and the muscles involved, and it can persist for weeks to months. The mechanism is not fully understood, but it appears to involve adaptations in the mechanical properties of the muscle fiber itself, in the cytoskeletal proteins that reinforce the Z lines, and possibly in the inflammatory response, which becomes more efficient and targeted with repeated exposures. Your immune system, like your muscles, adapts to the specific demands placed on it. Now here is a practical question that matters more than most people realize. If DOMS is caused by an inflammatory cascade, should you take anti-inflammatory drugs to treat it? Ibuprofen, naproxen, aspirin, the NSAIDs that most people reach for instinctively when they are sore? The answer is complicated, and it depends on what you're trying to achieve. In the short term, NSAIDs will reduce the pain of DOMS. They inhibit cyclooxygenase enzymes that produce the prostaglandins responsible for sensitizing your nociceptors. So yes, they reduce soreness. But prostaglandins are not just pain mediators. They are also signaling molecules in the muscle repair and adaptation process. Several studies suggest that suppressing the prostaglandin response with NSAIDs in the days following intense exercise may impair the satellite cell activation that drives muscle repair and hypertrophy. One study found that ibuprofen and acetaminophen taken after resistance exercise actually reduced long-term muscle protein synthesis compared to a placebo group. The inflammation is not just a side effect of the damage, it is part of the repair signal. Blunting it aggressively may reduce the pain, but also reduce the adaptive response you were training for in the first place. This does not mean you should never take pain medication after training, but it does mean that reflexively medicating away every sign of soreness may be working against your own biology. The same logic applies, in a more nuanced way, to other recovery interventions. Cold water immersion, for example, has strong evidence for reducing DOM symptoms and improving subjective recovery in the short term. But some evidence suggests that chronic use of cold water immersion after strength training may blunt hypertrophic adaptations over time, possibly by suppressing some of the same inflammatory and satellite cell signaling pathways. The soreness is uncomfortable, but the discomfort is the cost of the signal, and the signal is what drives the adaptation. Let us zoom out one more time, because there is a dimension of this story that connects to something much larger than gym recovery. The inflammatory cascade that causes DOMS is a version of the same fundamental immune process that responds to any tissue damage anywhere in the body. The same neutrophil recruitment, the same macrophage phases, the same cytokine signaling, the same sequence of inflammation followed by resolution and repair happens in a healing wound, in a recovering bone fracture, in the liver regenerating after damage. What makes DOMS unique is that the damage is controlled, predictable, and deliberately induced. You chose to stress the tissue. You knew the damage was coming, and your body responds with the same ancient repair program that evolved over hundreds of millions of years to deal with injury, turning it into the mechanism by which you grow stronger. Because here is what happens after the macrophages clear the debris and the M2 phase begins. The satellite cells, which are muscle stem cells that live just outside the muscle fiber membrane, become activated. They proliferate. Some of them fuse with existing muscle fibers, donating new nuclei and new protein synthesis machinery to the damaged regions. The fiber rebuilds, not just to where it was, but slightly stronger, with more structural reinforcement at the Z-lines, with a slightly larger cross-sectional area, with greater resistance to the same mechanical stress in the future. This is myofibrillar hypertrophy at the cellular level. This is what adaptation actually looks like, not in a graph or a formula, but in the molecular events unfolding inside individual muscle cells over the 48 to 72 hours after a hard training session. So the next time you wake up 2 days after a workout and you struggle to walk down a flight of stairs, here is what is actually happening inside those aching muscles. Your immune system has deployed its first and second responders to a site of controlled structural damage. Neutrophils have cleared the debris. Macrophages are releasing the signals that activate your muscle stem cells. Prostaglandins have sensitized your pain receptors to tell your brain that this tissue is occupied, under repair, and needs to be treated carefully. The soreness is not a mistake. It is not a sign that you overtrained or that something went wrong. It is your body running a repair and upgrade protocol that it has been running for hundreds of millions of years, triggered by the same structural disruption that has always been the cost of becoming physically stronger. The pain is the price of the adaptation. And understanding what that pain actually is, not acid, not damage signals, not the body failing, but the immune system working exactly as designed, changes what it means to feel sore. It means the system is running. The repair has begun. And in 48 to 72 hours, the tissue will be stronger than it was before you started. That is not suffering. That is applied biology. There is one more layer to this story that most people never reach, and it is the one that reframes not just DOMS, but the entire concept of physical adaptation. Because the question of why soreness peaks at 48 hours is really a question about timing, about why the body does not respond to damage immediately. And the answer to that question reveals something fundamental about how biological repair systems work. When tissue damage occurs, your body faces a fundamental problem. It needs to repair the damage. But before it can repair it, it needs to assess it. It needs to determine how extensive the damage is, which cells are salvageable and which need to be cleared, what structural changes need to be made, and how much new protein synthesis is required. This assessment takes time. It requires the arrival of immune cells with the molecular tools to evaluate the damaged site. It requires the release and diffusion of signaling molecules that communicate the extent of injury to neighboring cells and to the systemic immune system. It requires a coordination process across multiple cell types, none of which can communicate at the speed of the nervous system. They communicate through chemistry, and chemistry takes time to diffuse, to bind to receptors, to trigger gene expression changes, to produce new proteins. The 48-hour delay is not the body being slow. It is the body being careful. This is actually a general principle of biological repair systems. They do not react to damage with instant maximum response. They respond in a staged, calibrated way that scales with the severity and nature of the injury. A tiny paper cut triggers a brief, localized inflammatory response that resolves in hours. A major muscle-damaging workout triggers a multi-day systemic immune response involving the bone marrow, the lymph nodes, and the bloodstream. The body's response is proportional because it has to be. An immediate, maximum inflammatory response to every minor cellular stress would be catastrophically expensive and destructive. Inflammation itself causes collateral damage. Reactive oxygen species, which are part of the immune response, damage cell membranes and DNA indiscriminately. Sustained, excessive inflammation is the mechanism behind many of the most serious chronic diseases. The inflammatory response has to be calibrated. It has to be proportional, and that calibration takes time. The staging of DOMS, the specific 48-hour timeline, is the result of this calibrated response system working exactly as it was designed to work. The neutrophils come first because they are fast, and they are already circulating in the blood. The macrophages come second because they have to be recruited and differentiated. The peak of pain at 48 hours corresponds to the peak of macrophage infiltration and cytokine concentration in the tissue, and the resolution of soreness over the following days corresponds to the shift from M1 inflammatory macrophages to M2 repair macrophages, the decline in prostaglandin levels, the desensitization of the nociceptors, and the beginning of structural repair in the muscle fibers themselves. Every step of this sequence is regulated. Every transition from one phase to the next is controlled by molecular signals. The body does not just turn on inflammation and wait for it to burn out. It actively manages the inflammatory process, turning it up and then turning it down, directing the immune cells through their phases, timing the activation of the repair machinery to follow the clearance of the debris. It is a precisely orchestrated program running in your muscle tissue right now if you trained in the last few days, unfolding on a schedule that is written into your immune system's operating software at a level far below conscious control. And this brings us back to the fundamental insight that makes applied biology different from fitness advice. Most of what you hear about recovery, about soreness, about the best way to train, is framed in terms of inputs and outputs. Do this exercise, feel this result, take this supplement, recover faster. But the actual biology is a managed process with its own internal logic, its own timeline, its own priorities. Your job, as the person living inside this system, is not to override it or fight it or drug it into submission. Your job is to understand it well enough to work with it, to give it the inputs it needs, to protect the process when it is running, to not mistake the signal for the problem. The soreness is not the problem. The soreness is the signal that the problem is being solved. And the 48 hours is not a delay. It is the time the solution takes to run. Your immune system is not slow. It is thorough. And at the end of that thorough process, if you gave your body enough time, enough protein, enough sleep, enough of everything it needs to complete the repair, you will be able to do what you could not do before. Lift what you could not lift. Run what you could not run. Move in ways that were previously beyond the capacity of the tissue you just rebuilt. That is the biology of soreness. Not acid, not damage, not failure. A staged immune response, calibrated to the degree of structural disruption, unfolding on a precise timeline, ending in adaptation. The ache you feel on the second day is the sound of your body becoming something it was not before. And now you know exactly why it waits 2 days to tell you. Let me give you one final thing to hold on to, because it connects everything we have covered today back to a much bigger picture. The immune system that causes your post-workout soreness is the same immune system that has been protecting and rebuilding biological tissue for hundreds of millions of years. Long before there were gyms, before there were humans, before there were vertebrates, the basic logic of inflammation, damage detection, immune cell recruitment, debris clearance, and tissue repair was already running in the bodies of early animals. Every time an organism was injured, every time tissue was damaged by physical stress or infection or trauma, this same staged response played out. And the organisms that had the most efficient, most accurately calibrated version of this response were the ones that survived, recovered fastest, and went on to pass their biology forward. You are the descendant of every organism in your lineage that survived damage and repaired it successfully. The inflammatory cascade running in your sore legs right now is the inherited product of hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Every component of it, the neutrophil receptors that detect damage-associated molecular patterns, the macrophage differentiation pathways, the prostaglandin synthesis cascade, the satellite cell activation signals, was shaped by natural selection into its current form because organisms that had it survived things that organisms without it did not. Your DOMS is ancient. Your soreness is the expression of a repair system older than bones, older than muscles as we know them, older than anything you would recognize as an animal. And every time you feel that deep familiar ache on the second day after a hard session, you are feeling one of the oldest biological programs on Earth running its course inside you, doing what it was built to do, assessing the damage, clearing the debris, rebuilding the structure, making you harder to break than you were before. That is what the 48-hour delay is. That is what the soreness means. That is applied biology in every muscle you can barely move this morning. And there is something worth saying about the practical side of all this, because understanding the mechanism should change how you approach the days after a hard training session. If DOMS is an immune response, then the things that support immune function and tissue repair are the things that support recovery from DOMS. Sleep is the most important of all of them. During deep sleep, your body releases the highest concentrations of growth hormone of the day, a key driver of satellite cell activation and muscle protein synthesis. The repair process that begins with the macrophage M2 phase is accelerated during sleep in ways it simply cannot be during waking hours. If you train hard and then sleep poorly, you are running the inflammatory part of the process, but impairing the repair part. You get the damage and the soreness without the full adaptation that makes the damage worthwhile. Protein intake in the 24 to 72-hour window after muscle-damaging exercise is directly relevant to the repair process. Satellite cells that fuse with damaged muscle fibers need amino acids to synthesize new contractile proteins. The myofibrils that were disrupted need to be rebuilt with structural proteins. If dietary protein is insufficient during this window, the repair machinery is running, but the building materials are limited. The immune response is expensive, the repair process is expensive, and the body will prioritize immune function over muscle rebuilding if resources are scarce. Movement, light, and unloaded appears to support recovery without impairing it. Gentle movement increases blood flow to the damaged tissue, which supports the delivery of immune cells, amino acids, and oxygen needed for repair, and supports the removal of waste products and inflammatory mediators. This is part of why active recovery, easy walking, swimming, cycling at low intensity tends to produce better subjective recovery outcomes than complete rest after intense training. You are not loading the tissue enough to extend the damage. You are supporting the biological processes that are already running. And this is the final reframe I want to leave you with. Recovery is not passive. It is not what happens when you stop training. It is an active biological process, running on specific substrates, responding to specific inputs, unfolding on a specific timeline. DOMS is not a nuisance to be managed around your training schedule. It is a readout of where you are in that process. When it peaks, you are at maximum immune activity in the damaged tissue. When it begins to fade, the M2 macrophages have taken over and the repair phase is underway. When it disappears, the structural rebuilding is largely complete and the tissue is ready to be loaded again. The soreness is a window into a process you cannot see, and now you know how to read it. 48 hours, neutrophils to macrophages, inflammation to repair, damage to adaptation. That is the timeline. That is the cascade. That is your body doing exactly what it evolved to do, turning the stress you chose to apply into the strength you are trying to build. One immune response at a time, one rebuilt sarcomere at a time, one painful morning at a time. Applied biology happening in real time in every muscle that aches right now.